What Once Was Mine, Chapter 56, Rapunzel. By the time they made it to the castle, the crowd of people marching home had whittled down to just Rapunzel, on Maximus with Pascal, and Flynn and Gina on her horse. Some lords and their mercenaries stayed behind at Castle Bathory to take the countess to trial. Some went back to their own lands. Bathory's prisoners and servants joyfully returned to their families. The snuggly duckling thugs went to the pop-up in the woods, where they would present Rasco with more than enough gold to rebuild his tavern. As the 6 friends tiredly approached the wall, painted gates, so different from Bathory's, Rapunzel found her heart beating wildly. Despite calm reassurances to herself that she belonged here, that she was the fairy tale crown princess coming home. Because she didn't really belong here. Not really. She had never seen this castle up close, at least not since she was a baby, and she had outgrown her tower. The forest in the Goodwife's Valley called to her. The idea of sleeping behind stone walls again filled her with dread. Who were these people she was finally meeting? What if they turned out to be more Bathory than King David? What if, having given her away 19 years ago, they wanted nothing to do with her now? Hey, Gina pulled her horse to a halt at the foot of the bridge. I think this is all you from here on out. Yeah, Flynn said with a weak smile. Gina and I don't really belong here, officially. You will do no such thing, Rapunzel said in a commanding tone, only realizing halfway through that what she said doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I am only here because of you two. If they accept me, they'll accept all of us. If they reject me, I'm going to burden you until you figure out what to do with me. I would give all the stolen crowns in the world for you to burden me, Flynn said, giving his old devilish smile at the end. And so they rolled over to the bridge together. The guards immediately saw that someone unusual was up. Rapunzel, still in her white goat's wool tunic, sitting straight upon a magnificent shining Talori horse, her silver hair around her like Lady Godiva's. By the time the 6 friends crossed the bridge, more guards had emerged from the castle, flanking either side of the doors. This was both a relief and a surprise to Rapunzel, who had literally no idea what to say when she got up close. Hello, I'm Rapunzel, the very not-much-dead daughter of your king and queen. Well met. This is your Captain Maximus I'm riding here, and... Hey, so I know Flynn Rider behind me is a wanted criminal, but he's also in dire need of a doctor, you see. He helped rescue your crown princess, and... A dozen or so Rapunzel lengths away from the gate, she slipped down from her horse, who stood very straight and unhorselike at attention in front of his men. While she kept waiting for the right words to come, the guards looked at her curiously, and also waited for something. All at once a middle-aged woman pushed her way through the men, her silver-streaked hair and expressive dress flapping somehow both crazily and elegantly around her. Despite her naked face and lack of crown, Rapunzel recognized her at once. The Queen. And a moment later recognized her again in the shape of her eyes and brow, the hang of her surprised open mouth. Mother. Rapunzel, the woman whispered, stopping for a moment to stare. Then she ran forward again and enveloped Rapunzel in her arms, weeping and pressing her face against her daughter's chest. Rapunzel was overwhelmed. Her first urge was to hug back, something she always wanted to do, but Gothel never reciprocated. Any idea of a speech or the questions flew away, forever as this woman received and accepted Rapunzel and sobbed all at once, and held a lock of her hair tightly in a fist, wrapping it around her knuckles as if she meant to keep Rapunzel from fleeing. Mother? Rapunzel finally said, trying it out. I'm sorry, came the response, whispered and choked. The woman was terrified. She was expecting rebuke and hatred, maybe even welcoming it. Mother, Rapunzel said with a smile, putting her arms around her as she might a goat or a little girl. Aren't you afraid of my hair? No, the Queen said emphatically. If I died now, I would be happy. All I ever wanted was to hold you again. And then Rapunzel felt her face screw up all ugly, and she began to sob, loud, horrible, unprincessly, noises that gulped at the air like she had been suffocating her whole life. There were no remaining doubts that this was her real mother, a woman who hugged, cried, loved, and wasn't afraid. A silent man stood behind him, face crossed with far too many lines for his age, a simple crown upon his head. Dad? Rapunzel asked. Father sounded too. He came forward hesitantly, tears streaking down those hollow cheeks, and he wrapped his giant arms around both of the women. Rapunzel had no idea how long they stayed that way, or having grown up in a tower, how unusual it was for a king and a queen to kneel, weeping on the cobblestones in front of a castle, engaged in a very private family moment. The accidental clop of a horse, intercepting the nervousness of her rider, woke Rapunzel up in the softest, best moment she'd ever had. "Mom, Dad," she said, wiping her face. "This is Eugene and Gina. They saved me and rescued me and brought me here." Not quite in that order. The king raised an eyebrow at Flynn, who saluted him as best as he could. "Isn't that Flynn Rider, the very wanted thief?" he demanded in a rich, rolling voice. "The one who stole the goblet and the crown?" "No, dear," the queen said, wiping her eyes. "Our daughter just told you that's Eugene, who saved her. No relation at all to that other man." She gave Flynn a sharp look, and the corner of her mouth twitched into a hastily smothered smile. Flynn blinked in surprise. "And I have the crown back anyway," Rapunzel said quickly. She would have to ask about the goblet later. "And this is Captain Tresberg, who also helped rescue me, and whose life I sort of saved by turning him into a horse." Rapunzel would not forget the look in the king and queen's face for the rest of her life. Maximus bowed. One front leg curled under and the other splayed out, his neck extended gracefully. "I thought I recognized him," one of the guards whispered to another in wonder. Despite the insistent tapping on her neck, Rapunzel decided to wait on introducing Pascal. Things had already gotten a little out of hand. There would be time for everything later. Later took a little while to sort out. Gina was given a generous reward in gold coin, along with new clothes and boots, and a decorated set of tack and equipment for her horse, and was also invited to stay in the castle for as long as she wanted. After she bathed and put on new clothes and outfitted her horse, she proceeded to wander around the castle a little nervously, obviously wanting to be somewhere else, but not wanting to appear ungrateful. Maximus was put through some fairly comedic paces because, as was human nature, few people immediately believed who he was. Once his identity was determined without a doubt, many whinnies and hoof-taps later, it then had to be determined whether he still wanted a role in the castle guard, or whether he would prefer to literally be put out to pasture. In the end, it was decided that for now he would oversee the transition of leadership to his lieutenant, while enjoying the kingdom's finest apples served to him on a silver platter. Flynn was immediately put in the care of Signor da Trialzi, who was resigned really, about his head wound. Rapunzel wasn't worried. The full moon was in a few nights, and according to Gina's mother, that meant her powers would be the most sun-like, and therefore healing. The king and queen watched as their daughter sat by him and laughed softly, and brought him food and drink. "So, this Eugene," the king said, clearing his throat. "Who exactly is he?" Rapunzel tried not to giggle, watching the king of a country take faltering steps in his new role, that of father. She might have been raised in a tower, but she had spent the last couple of weeks running, adventuring, meeting witches and human demons, seeing violence firsthand, and learning about life. She would do her best to be daughtered, but she wasn't a little girl. "He's my..." She couldn't think of the word. Hero was closest, but for obvious reasons straight out. Rescuer? Friend? Sweetheart sounded stupid. She finished. "He's mine," she repeated simply. "Is this true?" the queen asked Flynn archly. "Yes, ma'am, your majesty," he said, with his cheeks properly shaved and washed, and his hair combed back despite his bandage. Flynn fairly glowed against the white pillow. Rapunzel could have kissed him then and there. "I am entirely at your daughter's command. 100%. Devoted and unflagging, and whatever she says I am." "Oh, because..." The queen and king exchanged looks. "You were riding with Gina and..." Gina looked up with big, terrified eyes. "Max wouldn't let him ride," Rapunzel began to explain. "I think he still holds Eugene's, background against him and..." "Belch," Gina spat out before she could stop herself. Her? No way. No offense, Flynn said. None taken. I mean, are you kidding? She's kind of a handful. He's definitely an idiot. Totally not my type. Yeah, and my type is human. The queen laughed. You're better than court jesters. Rapunzel said you're both orphans, is that true? Yep, from Mother Mary of the Blessed Little Children, Flynn said almost proudly. Oh, that place. The king's eyes went dark. You must have been there before the queen became involved. It was terrible. She poured all her sorrow and guilt from giving up Rapunzel into improving the orphanage and the lives of the children all over the kingdom. It's much nicer now. Rapunzel was glad to hear that. She had ideas for the country. One she wanted to start putting into place before she became queen. It was good that there was precedent. But look at the two of you, the queen pressed. And Eugene and Gina. Didn't you ever think about that? Flynn and Gina looked at each other confused, with now what Rapunzel thought about strangely similar faces. I wonder if there's any way to prove it, Flynn said in wonder. Oh my God, Rapunzel shrieked, unable to help herself. She bounced. I have a sister, a real sister. She threw her arms around Gina and squeezed her tight. The other girl looked a little uncomfortable, but also a little happy. This is the happily after ever, she added, and then she calmed down, leaning over and kissing Flynn so familiarly on the lips, and her overjoyed and mostly accepting parents still squeezed each other's hands nervously. I wish we could have begun it 19 years ago, the queen said softly. Eventually, of course, came the fairy tale royal wedding, modified a bit. Flynn was not royalty. He was named royal consort, which sent Gina into a fit of giggles whenever his title was announced. Flynn always unroyally tried to whack her. Everyone was there, even Gina's mother, who had made the big trip from the forest and wore a crown of flowering brambles for the occasion. Rapunzel had no problem fitting into castle life. In fact, her parents seemed almost fragile with her around, undone by a mistake nearly 20 years ago that they would never forgive themselves for. But the girl who had spent so long in a tower didn't have a habit of looking backward. Who knew if she would be where she was today, with whom she was, if things had worked out so differently? It was a lesson she made sure all the children of the kingdom learned in the school she set up. She also built an extension to the orphanage with an apprenticeship program for boys and girls who were too old to be adopted, but too young or unwilling to marry. No one was ever adopted into servitude again. They would learn to be smithies or healers, scholars or weavers, whatever they wanted. The crowning touch of this plan was that Gina will be directing the school, Rapunzel announced proudly. No, thank you, Gina said almost immediately. What? As the happily ever after had unrolled, nothing at all interrupted the princess's wishes and desires, so this was a bit of a surprise. I want to have more adventures, Gina said with a shrug. Her braid was now tied off with a silver clasp, but she still stood and spoke like her old self, with few words and lots of shyness. I said all I wanted was a horse of my own and the chance to make a name for myself. I can do that now. I'll miss you and Flynn. I'll come back, but I have legends of my own I want to make. Oh, Pitts, Rapunzel said. I understand. I just thought we'd all live together like a family. I'll be here for Christmas, Gina promised. They hugged, and Rapunzel cried a little and laughed. After Gina left, the princess walked the rose garden by herself, feeling melancholy and moody. She wondered about the ends of things, and if happily ever afters ever lasted. That's how Flynn found her. Sensing her mood, he took her by the hand and pulled her over to the little bench by the apple trees. What are we doing? Rapunzel asked curiously. I think you need a break from princessing, Flynn said. Besides, it's after 8. Way past time for reading. He held up a book whose cover he had replaced with one he had made. It said, Book number 38. Rapunzel, overwhelmed by how much he understood and loved her, reached up and kissed him fully on the lips. Reading would have to wait until later.